This is a salt marsh or a brackish marsh. These are really, really cool habitats because these habitats are ones that are half flooded with salt water because of the tide, but yet there's a fresh mix of water coming in from rivers or other things. These are the habitats that exist around the coastlines of a lot of areas of the world. And they're characterized by the fact that they have this even mix, what's called this brackish water, of partly salt and partly fresh. The closer you get to the ocean, the more salty it is. The closer you get, or the more you move inland up the rivers, the more fresh water it gets. But the one characteristic that binds all salt marshes together is the fact that they are affected by tides. There's two main divisions to a salt marsh. The first division is the area that is below the average high tide mark. These are areas where it stays flooded most of the time, the tide goes out and it can dry out and it can come in. That's called the low marsh. The high marsh is the area that really only gets flooded during periods of extreme high tide, like spring tides, or possibly during storms. They will get inundated at that point. And these are the two, they can be subdivided into other areas beyond that, but those are the two main distinctions of these areas. These plants and animals that live in these marshes are just amazing because they've been designed to literally spend half their life drowning in brackish water and the other half of their life drying out under a subtropical or temperate sun. And you think you're having a rough day. Let's go explore the salt marsh some. The diversity in these habitats is really not that great. There's only two main plant species. Way down in the lower marsh, you have the smooth cordgrass, and as you transition up here and get up here closer to the high marsh, you have all this black needle rush. Those are the two dominant species. Now, out in the salty areas, way on out, you might have a couple of 100 yards or so of that smooth cordgrass. It's really, really abundant. As you move upstream, as you move more inland, the diversity of plant life begins to increase. But the animal life out here is incredibly diverse. I've seen otter and raccoon that are all through this area. You've got all kinds of turtles and terrapins. You have the bird life is amazing. The bitterns, the egrets, the herons, kingfishers, osprey, all kinds, and then a wealth of songbirds that surround this area that are living up in the trees on the borders of this marsh. So just an incredible amount of diversity. Now, one of the animals that's most common, it's hard to walk in this mud. One of the animals that's most common is called the marsh periwinkle. Cute little snails. These guys live up here in these marshes. This is probably the most abundant single form, at least of invertebrate life, that's around this area. These guys are amazing. The females, after mating, will go down during high tide and lay her eggs in the water. Once she lays her eggs in the water, they will hatch out and live as larvae, and then eventually as juveniles down in the water, in the muck, in the mud. Those that survive to adulthood will crawl up on these stalks. I'm seeing them all throughout this area, crawling up. They're way up above the water line. Now that sounds kind of weird because this is an animal that breathes with gills. You would think, oh my gosh, it's got to be in the water. No, it actually stays out of the water. As the high tide comes up, these animals will retreat up their stalk, and as the high tide goes down, they will go down and begin to feed into all their stuff. Why are they avoiding the water? Well, apparently it's a better struggle trying to breathe than it is trying to avoid the crabs that would eat them if they were down in the water. So I'm gonna make sure this girl right here, this guy stays up out of the water like that. Get out of the water. There we go. That way they're safe. the mud here isn't just sticky, it's stinky. This mud is filled with tons and tons of decomposing plant material, all kinds of stuff. But because of the environment that it's in, it is very low oxygen. It is called hypoxia. Hypoxia means low oxygen environment. What that means is that only certain bacteria can live here to break down all this material. And those certain bacteria give off sulfur compounds as their waste product. Well, you and I know sulfur as the sulfur compounds as the rotten egg smell. So everywhere around here, every step, every bubble that pops up is filled with rotten egg smell. It's pretty nasty. In the midst of these marshes, you have these natural channels that develop. These natural channels are deeper and they hold water pretty much all the time. That's because as the rivers are flowing out, they continue to carve those paths and eliminate the chance for these marsh grasses and things to grow. Also, whenever the tide goes out, that increases that flow and continues to erode this area and keep it naturally open. Now, not all of these channels were natural originally. Some of them actually were produced by a practice known as ditching. What you would do is you would come into this area and you would carve out these channels and drain these marshes to get the water out. Now, why would you want to do that when you have this amazing, amazing habitat? Well, it's because, as I'm sure you can hear by a lot of the automobile traffic around here, we have lots and lots of people and mosquitoes don't get along. The mosquitoes are really bad in this part because mosquitoes will breed in the water. They're going to lay their eggs in the water. That's where the larvae exist. So in these habitats that are marshy like this, there's tons and tons and tons of mosquitoes. Well, people wanted to get rid of them. They thought, get rid of the water, get rid of the mosquitoes. Here's the problem. It didn't work. Why? Number one, as you drained out this water, what you ended up doing was these channels that you dug that were not natural, the channels that were dug that were not natural, ended up silting up. And that trapped a lot of the fresh water and it simply converted a lot of these marshes from salt water or brackish water to fresh. And by converting them to fresh water, that just allowed for freshwater mosquitoes to begin to breed instead of the saltwater mosquitoes. So you still have the same problem. Now, even if you kept those channels clean, you still had the problem that you can't drain everything. So there were still pools and pockets of deeper areas in the marshes that contain the water, and the mosquitoes continued to breed. And if that's not bad enough, as those mosquitoes bred, because you drained out the water, you eliminated all of the fish predators that would feed on the mosquito larva. So you still didn't solve the problem. You know, God created these systems in a balance. Maybe we should just leave them alone and stop thinking that we know more than He does. Sheesh. About 50% of the salt marshes that exist in the United States exist here in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's a really, really good thing too, because these salt marshes, when you've got an expanse of several hundred meters of this black needle rush and smooth cordgrass and all these other plants that are in these higher areas, these estuary areas, these things are great wave breaks. All of this grass, as waves come in and the tide comes in, all this stuff disperses that energy and it helps to prevent erosion from the ocean, the Gulf, literally stealing sediments from the beach, from the shorelines, and back out and washing it out into the Gulf. The other thing it does is the root systems of these grasses are so extensive, they penetrate down into the peat, down into the muck. And as they penetrate down in there, they literally grab hold of all the sediment. So even when it rains, let's say during a hurricane or other things, when there's lots of rain, that rain, when it erodes that sediment off the land, it still gets trapped and gets caught here in the marshes. So these things are really, really great for preventing all of that erosion, these are great things to keep. Huh. Got a feather of something. Again, credible areas of diversity. So, the next time you're heading down to the coast, cruising down to the beach, don't just hurry on and get to your spot and do your sun tanning and your shell collecting, although that's all good stuff. Instead, don't rush through the salt marshes. Take the time, slow down, explore these amazing habitats. Stop, smell the roses, or in this case, the rotten egg smelling muck. But it'll be worth it.